the mystical experiences with psychedelics, which are similar to mystical experiences in other ways, and how that impacts social change. So it's like the political implications of the non-dual experience. And I want to start by really talking about how many of us perceive the current world situation. A lot of it is in a crisis, and Albert Einstein has said it has become appallingly obvious that our technology has exceeded our humanity. And I think that's really clear, that we have so much incredible scientific knowledge, but we don't have the spiritual and emotional maturity to handle it. And as a consequence, the environment's being destroyed. There's the potential of nuclear destruction. So how do we really handle the products of the mind that we have developed that are incredibly powerful? And there's some hints in the UNESCO Charter. It says, since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed. So what they're saying essentially is that it's psychological factors that are really what threaten the survival of the human race, the survival of the life on Earth, and that we have to find some way psychologically to bring about a healthier state. And Albert Einstein, again, has said the splitting of the atom has changed everything save our mode of thinking, and thus we drift towards unparalleled catastrophe. What we shall require a substantially new manner of thinking if mankind is to survive. Now, what is this new manner of thinking that he's talking about? And I think it is precisely the non-dual thinking. It's that recognition that underneath all of the different ways that we define ourselves in terms of our country, our religion, our race, our gender, our socioeconomic status, all the different ways that we draw our identity that also makes us and them distinctions. That if we can understand underneath all of that, that we're all together, that it's all one, then that will breed more tolerance, more understanding, and that's the new mode of thinking. And that's what we see is happening all over the world, this emphasis on globalization, but it's also coming into conflict with a lot of fundamentalism. And so how do we promote this new manner of thinking? And in the early 1980s, I was inspired by a book by Robert Mueller. And Robert Mueller was the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, kind of the mystic of the United Nations. And this book was New Genesis, Shaping a Global Spirituality. And you could see also the profound shift in consciousness that took place once we had images of the Earth from the moon. Once people could really understand that the planet was, a single system. And this book was really basically that thesis, is that we need this mystical experience that is anchored not in just a few people, but in millions and billions of people, and then we'll have a more peaceful world. And his book was inspiring, but he didn't say anything about psychedelics. And so I decided that I would write him a letter. And I was just a college undergraduate at the time. And I said, I'm really profoundly influenced by your book, but there is a lot of people who found this kind of spirituality through psychedelics. And right now that research is suppressed all over the world as part of the counter-reaction against the 60s. I said, would you help to bring back psychedelic research from your position at the UN? And I told him a lot about the Good Friday experiment, which I'll tell you about in just a few minutes. And to my utter surprise, he wrote me back a handwritten note. And he said he would help, and that he did agree that it was important for science to use psychedelics to understand mystical experiences, and that from whatever he could do, he would help out. And through incredible coincidences, in 1984 and 85, MDMA was starting to be criminalized, and we were doing pretty well shutting them down and slowing DEA down in the United States, and they moved internationally through the WHO. And Stan's brother, Paul, was actually in charge of this committee that was reviewing the scientific evidence to make recommendations about whether MDMA and other molecules should be criminalized. And Robert Mueller arranged for me to go speak to the scientific advisor of that committee. And in a tremendous lone sort of heroism, Paul was the only one of that committee that voted against the criminalization of MDMA. And there was just a tiny little footnote in their report to the WHO about recommending the criminalization, and it said that Paul was worried that the criminalization would slow down the research, and that he got the committee to encourage the nations of the world to facilitate research into this most interesting substance. So what on the larger scale looked like a major defeat, that MDMA was recommended for criminalization all over the world, this little footnote eventually was used by the Swiss government in 1988 to resume research with psychedelics. And so sort of the lone critic standing up against the tide of history can make a difference, and Paul was a great example of that.
This is really the role of psychedelics. This is how the role I see plant medicine play in this revolution. Like there's a reason these plants are coming to every corner of the world. Ayahuasca is Incan technology, pre-Incan technology of the highest magnitude. And we would never turn down the use of the internet to send snail mail. We'd never, that's why, when someone says to me, well, I don't need ayahuasca, I meditate. And I'm like, you have access to a plant that is the emissary of Gaia. And its sole purpose is to speed up the evolution of human consciousness and to upgrade your software so you can have Gaia 3.0 or whatever, the equivalent of Capitan OS X. And you're going to choose not to do that. And the plants make that inner work much easier. And we've always had a symbiotic relationship with plants. They are not other. And so for me, it's like I humble myself to these plants and to nature. And I ask to do that work because I know doing that work is going to make me a better activist. It's going to make me better at fighting the superstructure. It's going to make me a better community member.
Oh, it's part of your practice.
It's part of the practice.
And where do you think they come from, these plants? Do you think, Terence McKenna used to talk about, there's mushroom spores or alien DNA. And what do you think's going on here?
Yeah, no, that's the ultimate metaphysical question.
I have trouble, talk about Jewish guilt or something. I have trouble even eating because you're chewing the life out of some other form.
Right. Yeah.
It's hard.
Yeah, no, it is hard. No, it took me a long time to want to be here. I probably was 17 when I first accepted that actually I'm going to play this game in this incarnation. From a Sufi perspective, what we would say is God is an emergent phenomena. God is a metaphor for the universe. And God is everywhere, right? Allah is everywhere. So we are the universe unfolding on itself. And the universe wanted to feel this expression of what it is to be 7 billion humans, or the birds and the bees and the wind and et cetera, et cetera. And in some ways, our purpose is to help guide that evolution. And so I don't really believe in the New Age ideal that the universe is on path and everything's perfect. And there's a great Ram Dass line where he says, well, the universe is perfect, including my desire to change it. And that's sort of more my perspective, is more quantum physics perspective, which is we meet the universe halfway. There's no predestiny. The old mystics were wrong about predestiny and providence, but there's also the Western rationalists were wrong. There's no pure agency. There's a meeting of the universe halfway that comes from intention, and it comes from entanglement, and it comes from context. And when we set our intention and we actually influence the ability of atoms to move in a certain way, and then our reaction, our observation, then changes the sort of multiverses of possibility. And the whole thing just happens at every moment simultaneously in this infinite progress or regress, or however you want to say it. And there's just infinite 0 points over and over and over.
Do you see human beings as having I hate to use a word like this, but a special place in this whole order?
I think part of the hangover from Darwinism and neo-Darwinism is the belief that human beings are the pinnacle, the culmination of life. And I don't believe that. I think we're the newest and youngest members of the family of life. But I feel that human beings play a central role as stewards, as a companion species. Yet, we somehow think we've evolved outside of our Gaian mother. We think that evolution for human beings is taking on some other trajectory, some other spin that is outside of life. And I don't believe, I think that's the most insane. I think that's actually a driver of a lot of our psychosis. And we were saying this earlier in our discussion here at CUNY with the Media Studies group, that when human beings went to the moon for the first time, Gaia saw herself differently than she ever could have, because we are Gaia and we were reflecting back this vision from the moon. And human beings are going to play a central role somehow in bringing Gaian life outside of the solar system. Our sun has a 10 billion year half-life. She's not going to be here forever. And the human beings that exist a billion years from now are going to be as different to us as we are from single-cell amoebas. We have no idea what they're going to be, which is why we have to preserve life and have to be pro-life, because whatever life exists at the, whatever we want to call the end of days or the eschaton or that moment 10 billion years from now, we are going to be its progeny and vice versa. And so we know we're hardwired to defend life. All life is. And there's a reason for that. And I do believe in some kind of teleological directionality. And, McKenna, to bring back McKenna, used to talk about this increase in complexity. And this is what complexity theory was about. Novelty is increasing, and it's increasing at an infinite rate. Even the speed of light is changing. Mm-hmm. The boiling point of elements are changing. And so, of course, there's a trajectory. And he used to say, we're in parking orbit of the eschaton, or one of those great McKenna-isms. And the eschaton being the Christian study of the end of times, eschatology. And we do feel that we're in parking orbit of some eschaton, of some major transcendental moment. It's around us, and humans are playing a role. And I really believe we've reincarnated here on Gaia in 2017 in 3D for a reason. I don't pretend to know that reason. And I think, the mystery of life is not a problem to be solved. It's a mystery to surrender to. And that's the role the plants play, and that's the role meditation plays, and that's the role any transcendental experience plays for me.